In a dying shopping mall on the edge of the city, where most stores sit empty and the lights flicker like tired eyes, a horror store appears overnight without warning. There are no construction sounds, no ownership records, and no explanation for how it came to exist. One evening, just before midnight, her sister becomes strangely drawn to it. The sign above the entrance hums softly, and the display window shows mannequins posed in twisted, unnatural positions. Ignoring her sister's pleas, she insists on stepping inside at exactly 11:59 p.m. The air changes the moment she crosses the threshold, colder, heavier, almost alive. Two pale women stand behind the counter, identical and silent, their eyes following her every move without blinking. The aisles seem longer than the space should allow, stretching into shadow. The clock on the wall ticks louder and louder until it strikes 12. Instantly, the doors slam shut. The lights flicker violently before settling into a dim red glow. The mannequins subtly shift their heads toward her. She backs away, heart pounding, realizing the figures look less like props and more like trapped people. A faint scratching sound echoes from above. Slowly, she looks up. One of the silent sisters is crawling across the ceiling, moving like a spider, her joints bending the wrong way. The other sister smiles for the first time. Her scream pierces the empty mall. Then everything goes silent. By morning, the store has vanished. But in the mall's dusty hallway stands a new mannequin in the window, wearing her sister's clothes. The mall had been dying for years. Broken escalators, shuttered shops, and echoing corridors filled with dust. Yet every night, one store remained open, a horror shop that no one remembered being built. Her sister had always been fearless, curious to a fault. When she heard rumors that anyone entering after 11:59 p.m. was never seen again, she laughed it off. Urban legends, she said. That night, she decided to prove everyone wrong. At 11:58 p.m., she stood outside the store. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a sickly purple glow across the hallway. Inside, shelves were lined with masks, antique dolls, cracked mirrors, and taxidermy animals posed mid-scream. Two identical women stood at the counter, dressed in black, their long hair hanging unnaturally still. They did not blink. They did not breathe. At least, it didn't look like they did. When the clock hit 11:59 p.m., she stepped inside. The door closed softly behind her. At first, nothing happened. She smirked, pulling out her phone to record. But the signal disappeared. The temperature dropped sharply. The mirrors lining the walls no longer reflected her movements correctly. Her reflection lagged behind, smiling when she wasn't. Then midnight struck. The lights snapped off. In the darkness, she heard something dragging across the floor, slow, deliberate. A whisper filled the air, though no lips moved. When the emergency lights flickered on, the store looked different. The aisles were gone. The exit had vanished. And the mannequins were no longer in fixed poses. They were closer. The last thing security cameras captured was her running toward the door, and the two women suddenly standing directly in front of her without taking a single step. By morning, the store was empty, except for one new mannequin. Her sister always loved abandoned places. When she heard about the strange horror store inside the nearly empty mall, she became obsessed. People whispered that it appeared only at night and vanished by morning. Some said it fed on fear. Others claimed it chose its visitors carefully. One night, just before closing time, she dragged her reluctant sister to see it. The mall corridors were silent, escalators frozen in place, fluorescent lights buzzing weakly overhead. And there it was, a narrow storefront squeezed between two permanently closed shops. The sign above it read, "Open after midnight." The display window showed mannequins posed like terrified customers, their faces frozen mid-scream. At exactly 11:59 p.m., her sister stepped inside. The air felt thick, like walking underwater. The door closed behind her without a sound. Inside, two identical women stood in the center of the shop instead of behind the counter. Their heads tilted slightly, as if studying her. They never blinked. Shelves were filled with strange items, jars labeled with names instead of ingredients, photographs of people who looked frightened, and mirrors covered in fingerprints from the inside. When midnight struck, the store shifted. The walls stretched higher. The ceiling darkened into something that looked endless. The mannequins slowly turned their heads toward her sister. Their glassy eyes weren't empty. They were pleading. She tried to run, but the floor felt soft, almost breathing beneath her feet. The two women began to move, not walking, but gliding unnaturally fast, their feet never quite touching the ground. Her sister screamed as the lights exploded above her. The next morning, the mall corridor looked normal again. The horror store was gone, but in the center of the hallway stood a single mannequin, wearing her sister's necklace. Her sister had been acting strange for days after discovering the horror store in the abandoned wing of the mall. She claimed it wasn't there during the day, only after 11:59 p.m. No one believed her. So one night, she went alone to prove it. The mall was nearly silent when she arrived. The security guard had already left his post. Half the lights were off. At the far end of the corridor, between two empty shops covered in dust, the horror store glowed faintly red. Its sign flickered as if struggling to stay alive. Inside, the air smelled old, like damp wood and something metallic. Two identical women stood near the entrance this time, not behind a counter. Their skin looked pale gray under the dim lighting. Their eyes followed her sister without moving their heads. Shelves were packed tightly with antique dolls, cracked porcelain masks, and life-sized mannequins dressed in modern clothes. One mannequin looked exactly like a missing person from the news. Her sister felt uneasy but kept walking. She noticed the mannequin's hands were slightly warm, not cold plastic, but almost human. She pulled her hand back quickly. At exactly midnight, a loud clicking sound echoed from the walls. All the mannequins' heads turned toward her at once. The two women disappeared. Then came the scratching sound from above. Slowly, she looked up. The sisters were crawling across the ceiling, their long hair hanging downward, faces twisted into wide, unnatural smiles. Their limbs bent sharply at impossible angles as they moved. The exit door was gone. Her sister tried to scream, but her voice felt swallowed by the room itself. The mannequins stepped down from their platforms, surrounding her silently. The next morning, mall workers found nothing unusual, except the horror store had one more mannequin than before, and this one was still warm. Her sister didn't believe in curses until the night the horror store called her name. For weeks, she had been dreaming about it. A narrow shop in a dying mall. A red neon sign flickering in the dark. Two silent women watching from inside. In every dream, the clock read 11:59 p.m. Finally, she decided to go. The mall felt abandoned when she arrived. Her footsteps echoed too loudly. At the end of the corridor, the horror store stood open, glowing faintly as if waiting just for her. The mannequins in the window weren't wearing costumes anymore. They were dressed in everyday clothes, like ordinary people frozen mid-movement. The door creaked as she stepped inside. The two identical sisters stood near the back wall, their faces expressionless. They didn't greet her. They didn't move. But she felt watched, not just by them, but by everything in the store. She noticed something strange. Each mannequin had a small tag around its wrist. Instead of prices, the tags had dates. Recent dates. Her hands trembled as she read one from yesterday. 11:59 p.m. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. A low humming filled the air. The mirrors lining the walls began to fog, and words slowly appeared across the glass. Stay. Midnight struck. The mannequins blinked. Not all at once, but one by one. Her sister stumbled backward, knocking over a shelf. The crash echoed, but the sound seemed distant, swallowed by the darkness spreading across the ceiling. The two silent women smiled for the first time. Their jaws opened wider than humanly possible. Her sister ran toward the door, but instead of the mall corridor, she saw only endless blackness beyond the frame. The next morning, the horror store looked ordinary again, and in the window stood a new mannequin, with a tag around its wrist reading today's date. Her sister never told anyone what she saw inside the horror store that first night. She only said one sentence when she came home. It knew my name. After that, she changed. She stopped sleeping. She kept checking the time, especially near midnight. Every night at exactly 11:59 p.m., her phone would buzz with a notification, but there was no sender, no message. Just a blank screen glowing red. 3 nights later, she disappeared. Security footage from the dying mall showed her walking calmly toward the horror store. The corridor lights flickered as she passed. The shop looked darker than before, its neon sign barely alive. The mannequins in the window were arranged differently, closer to the glass, their faces pressed forward as if watching her approach. She didn't hesitate. At 11:59 p.m., she stepped inside. The footage showed something strange. Once she crossed the doorway, the camera glitched. Static swallowed the image for exactly 60 seconds. When the picture returned at 12 a.m., the store looked empty. But faint movement could be seen behind the display window. Mall security rushed to check the location. There was no store, only a blank wall between two abandoned shops. The next day, rumors spread that the horror store had been seen again, this time on a different floor of the mall. And in its display window stood a new mannequin. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't reaching for help. It was standing calmly, staring outward, just like she used to. At exactly 11:59 p.m. that night, her old phone, found in her bedroom, lit up on its own. This time, a message appeared. She stays. Her sister swore the horror store wasn't just a shop, it was alive. She first noticed it on a Thursday night. The mall had only 3 stores still operating, yet suddenly a fourth appeared in the abandoned East Wing. No renovation, no workers, just a narrow storefront glowing under a dying red neon sign. Curiosity pulled her in. Inside, everything felt wrong. The shelves were too tall, the aisles too narrow, the mannequins too realistic. Their glass eyes reflected light even when there was none. 2 identical women stood at opposite corners of the store. They didn't speak. They didn't breathe. They simply watched. Her sister laughed nervously and began recording on her phone. "Proof," she whispered. At 11:59 p.m., a loud metallic click echoed from somewhere unseen. The temperature dropped instantly. Her phone screen glitched, showing her reflection instead of the camera view. But her reflection wasn't copying her movements. It was smiling. Midnight struck. The lights shut off completely. In the darkness, she heard fabric rustling, dozens of soft movements surrounding her. When dim emergency lights flickered on, the mannequins were no longer on their stands. They were standing in the aisles. Closer. The 2 silent sisters were gone from their corners. A scratching sound came from above. Slowly, shapes began moving across the ceiling, long limbs bending unnaturally, hair hanging downward like curtains. The sisters crawled silently overhead, their heads twisting upside down to stare at her. Her sister ran toward the exit, but every turn led back to the center of the store. Her breathing grew frantic. The mannequins formed a circle around her. The last sound captured on her phone recording was a whisper layered with many voices. "Join us." The next morning, mall staff reported seeing a new mannequin in the window. Its phone was still clutched tightly in its frozen hand. Her sister didn't believe the rumors at first. They said the horror store only appears to people who feel lost, that it chooses them. She had been struggling for months, sleepless nights, strange dreams, a feeling of being watched even at home. One evening, while walking through the nearly abandoned mall, she saw it for the first time. A storefront that hadn't been there before. The sign above it flickered softly, spelling only one word: "Enter." The mannequins in the display window looked disturbingly lifelike. One of them had her exact hairstyle. She felt drawn toward it. At 11:59 p.m., without fully understanding why, she stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a slow, heavy thud. The air felt thick, almost breathing. The walls were lined with mirrors, but none of them showed her reflection correctly. In some, she appeared older. In others, she was missing entirely. 2 identical women stood in the center of the shop, dressed in long black gowns. Their heads tilted in perfect synchronization. They didn't speak, but she heard whispering anyway. Midnight struck. Every mirror shattered at once. The sound was deafening. When the dust settled, the store looked different. There were no shelves, no counter, just mannequins standing in a wide circle around her. Their faces weren't blank anymore. They looked afraid. The 2 silent sisters began walking toward her, but their steps made no sound. As they passed the mannequins, each frozen figure twitched slightly, like something inside was trying to move. Her sister tried to scream, but her voice echoed back distorted, as if the store was repeating her fear. The next morning, mall security found nothing unusual. Except in the display window, there stood a new mannequin. Its reflection in the glass was still moving. The night her sister disappeared, the mall's power went out for exactly 9 minutes. No one questioned it at first. The place was old. Electrical failures were common. But what security found afterward was not. Earlier that evening, her sister had texted one message: "I'm going back to the horror store. It's different tonight." She had become obsessed with it. She claimed the layout changed every time she visited. that the mannequins sometimes whispered her secrets back to her. At 11:58 p.m., cameras showed her entering the abandoned wing. The corridor lights flickered violently as she walked. The horror store stood at the end, darker than usual, its windows covered in black cloth. At 11:59 p.m., she pushed the door open. Exactly 60 seconds later, the entire mall lost power. When electricity returned 9 minutes later, the cameras resumed recording. The corridor was empty, but something was wrong. The horror store's display window was uncovered again. Inside stood a row of mannequins facing outward. One of them was positioned closer to the glass than the others. Security zoomed in on the footage. The mannequin's chest was rising and falling. Slowly, as if breathing. Police searched the mall from top to bottom. No hidden rooms. No signs of struggle. No horror store. Just a blank stretch of wall where it should have been. Her sister was never found. Days later, a cleaning worker claimed she saw the horror store again, this time on the ground floor. In the window stood the same mannequins. Except now, one of them had tears running down its unmoving face. And every night at 11:59 p.m., the mall's power flickers for exactly 9 minutes. Her sister said the horror store didn't just appear, it followed her. The first time she saw it, it was on the second floor of the dying mall. The second time, it was near the food court. Each night, it changed locations, as if moving through the building like something searching. She became convinced it wanted her. One night, determined to end her fear, she went alone just before midnight. The mall was nearly silent, security gone, escalators frozen mid-step. At the far end of a dark hallway, the horror store waited again, lights dim, mannequins perfectly still in the window. But this time, all the mannequins looked like her. Same height, same hair, same clothes she had worn on different days. Her breathing quickened. At 11:59 p.m., the door slowly opened on its own. Inside, the shelves were gone. The walls were bare concrete. The two identical sisters stood at the center of the room, holding hands. Their eyes were completely black now. A clock appeared above them. 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 30 seconds. Her sister stepped inside, unable to stop herself. The door shut behind her without a sound. The mannequins in the window began tapping softly against the glass from the inside. 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 50 seconds. The silent sisters released hands and began walking toward her, though their feet hovered slightly above the ground. 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 58 seconds. The walls started closing in. 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. The sisters smiled wide enough to split their faces. Midnight. The lights exploded. The next morning, the mall looked emptier than ever. Several stores were permanently closed overnight. And where the horror store once stood, there was nothing, except for one mannequin placed in the center of the hallway. Unlike the others, this one was trying to move. Her sister began hearing the music before she ever stepped inside the horror store. It was soft at first, like a broken music box playing somewhere far away. She would hear it at night, especially near midnight. No matter where she was in the mall, the melody seemed to drift toward her. One evening, she followed the sound. At the far end of the abandoned corridor, the horror store stood waiting. Its lights were dim blue this time, not red. The mannequins in the display window were arranged like dancers frozen mid-performance. Their limbs were posed unnaturally, as if caught between movements. The music grew louder. 11:59 p.m. She stepped inside. The door closed gently behind her, and the melody immediately stopped. Silence. The two identical sisters stood near an old gramophone in the corner. The record on it was spinning, but no sound came from it now. The sisters' heads slowly turned toward her in perfect sync. Then the music started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the gramophone. It was coming from the mannequins. Their mouths were slightly open. Midnight struck. The mannequins began to move, not walking, but swaying like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. Their joints cracked softly as they turned toward her. The sisters stepped back into the shadows and vanished. The floor beneath her felt unsteady, like a stage shifting under weight. The music grew distorted, faster, louder, almost desperate. Her sister tried to run, but the mannequins formed a circle around her, swaying closer. The melody reached a high, sharp note, and suddenly stopped. The next morning, mall cleaners found an old gramophone sitting alone in the corridor. Beside it stood a new mannequin, posed like a dancer. Its fingers were still trembling. Her sister claimed the horror store didn't trap people. It replaced them. The first time she entered, she noticed something disturbing. The mannequins weren't random. They looked like ordinary shoppers. Different ages, different styles, each frozen in a moment of fear. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had once been real. Still, she went back. The mall was nearly abandoned that night, rain hitting the skylights above. At the end of the hallway, the horror store glowed faintly green. The mannequins in the window were arranged like a family: mother, father, child. But when she looked closer, she recognized the mother. It was a woman who had gone missing 2 months ago. At 11:59 p.m., her phone battery dropped from 87% to 1% instantly. The door creaked open by itself. Inside, the shelves were lined with framed photographs. Each frame showed a person standing inside the store, looking confused, afraid, trapped. As she walked past them, she realized something worse. The photos were dated. Tomorrow's date. At the back of the store stood the two identical sisters. They weren't smiling this time. They looked almost impatient. Midnight struck. All the framed photos shattered at once. The mannequins inside the store turned toward her slowly, their stiff fingers twitching. Her reflection in a nearby mirror didn't follow her movements. Instead, it stepped forward, pressing its hands against the inside of the glass as if trying to escape. The sisters whispered in perfect harmony. "Only one can remain." The lights went out. The next morning, police reported another missing person. The horror store was gone again. But the missing woman from 2 months ago? She was never listed as missing anymore. According to official records, she never existed. Her sister started seeing herself inside the horror store before she ever entered it. Each time she passed the abandoned wing of the mall, she caught a glimpse of someone standing in the display window. Same height, same posture, same jacket. But when she looked directly at it, the figure became just another mannequin. One night, determined to prove she wasn't imagining things, she waited outside the store until 11:59 p.m. The neon sign flickered weakly. The mannequin stood unnaturally still behind the glass. Then she saw it clearly. One mannequin blinked. Midnight struck. The door unlocked with a loud click. She stepped inside slowly. The air felt thick, heavy with the scent of dust and something faintly rotten. The shelves were empty this time. No dolls, no masks, just mirrors lining every wall. And in every mirror, she saw herself. Except the reflections weren't synchronized. Some versions of her were smiling. Some were crying. One was pounding desperately against the glass from the inside. The two identical sisters appeared behind her in the reflections first, not in the room itself. Their pale faces stretched into wide smiles. Then she felt a cold breath at her ear. The mirrors began cracking one by one, but instead of shattering outward, the glass seemed to pull inward, swallowing the reflections. Her own reflection suddenly grabbed her wrist. Hard. She screamed, trying to pull away, but her hand felt stuck in something cold and solid, like glass turning into liquid around her skin. The sisters whispered softly. There must always be one outside. The lights went out. The next morning, the horror store looked normal again. In the display window stood a mannequin wearing her jacket. And if you looked closely, it was trying to pull its hand free from the glass. The last thing her sister posted online was a single photo of the horror store. Caption: "It finally let me in." No one understood what she meant. For weeks, she had complained that the door would never open for her, no matter how hard she tried. Every time she reached for the handle before midnight, it felt locked. But she insisted the mannequins inside were changing positions each night, watching her. Then one night, everything changed. At 11:59 p.m., mall security footage showed her standing in front of the store. The mannequins in the display window were no longer facing outward. They were facing her. Midnight struck. The door slowly opened by itself. She stepped inside. The interior was darker than usual, lit only by dim red lights along the floor. The mannequins were arranged in two straight lines, forming a path toward the back of the shop, like a silent audience. At the end of the path stood the two identical sisters. They were smiling warmly this time, welcoming. As she walked forward, the mannequin's head slowly turned to follow her movement. Their glass eyes reflected fear, not menace. Halfway down the path, she realized something terrifying. The mannequins weren't watching her. They were watching the sisters. The air grew colder. The walls seemed to breathe. The sisters raised their arms slowly, palms facing her. And suddenly, Every mannequin dropped to its knees at once. As if in surrender, her scream echoed briefly through the mall, then stopped. The next morning, the horror store was still there. But the mannequins were different. Now they were all facing outward again. Except one. One stood at the very back, smiling gently, waiting for the door to open. Her sister didn't disappear the night she entered the horror store. She came back. That was the worst part. At exactly 11:59 p.m., security cameras captured her walking into the store like every other night. The two identical sisters stood inside, motionless as statues. Midnight struck. The lights inside flared bright white, and then everything went dark. But at 12:07 a.m., the door opened again, and her sister walked out. She looked normal, calm, smiling. When she came home, she said nothing about what happened inside. She went straight to her room and locked the door. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had changed. But small things were wrong. She didn't blink as often. She stood very still for long periods of time. And sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, her head tilted slightly, just like the silent sisters in the store. 3 days later, another girl from the mall vanished after visiting the horror store. That same night, her sister stood in front of the mirror for hours, staring at her reflection. When asked what she was doing, she answered softly, "Practicing." The power in their house began flickering every night at 11:59 p.m. One evening, her sibling woke up to a strange scratching sound on the ceiling. Slow, careful, crawling. Looking up slowly, they saw her sister clinging upside down above the bed, her smile stretched too wide, her eyes completely black. In a voice layered with two others, she whispered, "It doesn't replace everyone. It sends some back." The next morning, she was gone again. But the horror store had a new feature in its window display. A mannequin posed upside down, smiling.